I never thought the day would come when my own daughter would shove me against the balcony of her apartment, screaming that I either sign my house over to her husband or I'd be facing a 12-story drop. But there I was, clinging to the railing, feeling the icy Chicago wind whip against my face and the threatening emptiness at my back, while Regina's eyes shone with a fury I had never seen in her. My name is Marlene. I'm 63 years old, and until 3 months ago, I thought I knew my daughter. A widow for 5 years, I had found in Regina my only family, my only reason to keep going after losing my husband. But that afternoon, on the 12th floor of her high-rise apartment, I discovered that the girl I had raised with so much love had become a stranger, capable of anything to get what she wanted. It all started with a seemingly innocent phone call. "Mom, I need you to come for dinner with Edward and me," she had said, with that sweet voice I'd known since she was a little girl. "We want to fix things with you. This fight over the house is hurting all of us." It had been 2 months since I had flatly refused to sign my house over to Edward, her husband. 2 months since Regina had hung up on me when I explained that I would never put my home in the hands of a man I had known for only 2 years. 2 months of total silence between us, until that call, which I believed was an olive branch. I arrived at her apartment that afternoon with a heart full of hope. I was wearing my favorite green dress, the one I wore for all special occasions, and in my hands I carried a small pot of violets from my garden as a peace offering. How naive I was to think that my daughter truly wanted to reconcile. Edward opened the door with a smile that I now know was completely fake. "Marlene, what a joy to see you. Regina is waiting for you in the living room." But when I entered, I didn't find the table set for a family dinner as I had expected. Instead, I was met with a desk full of documents and an unknown man in a suit who looked at me with a serious expression. Beside him, Regina held more papers in her hands, and her face showed no trace of the warmth I had heard on the phone. "Mom," she said without even hugging me, "this is Philip, our lawyer. We've prepared all the documents for you to transfer the house to Edward's name. You just need to sign here." My blood ran cold. The pot of violets slipped from my hands and crashed onto the floor, scattering soil all over the beige carpet of the living room. The sound of the breaking clay pot echoed in the tense silence that had formed between us. "A lawyer," I managed to articulate, my voice trembling. "Regina, I came here thinking we were going to have dinner together, that we were going to talk like a mother and daughter." "And we are going to talk," Edward replied, approaching with the documents in hand. "But first, we need to resolve this issue with the house. Marlene, you can't be so stubborn at your age. This is a smart decision for everyone." Philip, the lawyer, cleared his throat and began to speak in a mechanical tone that made me feel like just another one of his business transactions. "Mrs. Marlene, the documents are in order. The transfer would be at no cost to you, and you would retain the right to live there for the rest of your life. It's a simple procedure. The right to live there for the rest of my life. As if my own home was a concession, as if 40 years of my life could be summed up in a cold, calculated legal clause. "No," I said with a firmness that surprised even myself. "I'm not signing anything. This meeting is over." I turned towards the door, but Edward stood in my way. His smile had completely vanished, and for the first time, I saw the true nature of his intentions in his eyes. "Marlene, you're not leaving here until you sign those papers," he said in a voice dripping with threat. "We've invested too much time and money in this." That was when Regina completely lost control. "Mom, stop playing the victim," Regina screamed in a voice I didn't recognize as her own. Her cheeks were flushed with anger, and for the first time in my life, I saw on my daughter's face the same cruel expression I had seen on her father's during the worst moments of our marriage. "You've always been selfish. Always thinking only of yourself." The words hit me like physical slaps. This was not the Regina I had raised, the little girl who used to hug me when she had nightmares, the young woman who cried in my arms when her first boyfriend left her. This was a stranger who looked at me with contempt, as if all the years of love and sacrifice I had invested in her meant absolutely nothing. "Regina, please, try to calm down," I pleaded, though my voice trembled. "We can talk about this like civilized people. We don't need lawyers or threats." "Threats?" She laughed, a bitter cackle that made my skin crawl. "Mom, this isn't a threat. It's reality. That house is too big for you. You can't maintain it alone anymore. Edward and I can give it the care it needs." Edward nodded from his position by the door, completely blocking my exit. "Marlene, think about it practically. You're 63 years old. What happens when you can't climb the stairs anymore? When you need medical help? We'll be there to take care of you, but we need the property in our name to make the necessary modifications." His words sounded reasonable on the surface, but I had lived long enough to recognize manipulation when I heard it. It wasn't concern for my well-being I saw in their eyes. It was pure, simple greed. "The house is perfectly maintained," I replied firmly. "I have enough savings for any repairs it might need, and my health is fine. I don't need you to take care of me as if I were an invalid." Philip, the lawyer, cleared his throat again. "Mrs. Marlene, I understand your reservations, but I must inform you that there are certain legal aspects that could become complicated if we don't resolve this amicably." A veiled threat. I understood it perfectly. They were telling me that if I didn't sign voluntarily, they would find other ways to take my house from me. "What legal aspects?" I asked, feeling my heart begin to beat faster. Edward and Regina exchanged a look, and I saw him give an almost imperceptible signal. It was then that I realized this had been planned in detail. It wasn't a reconciliation dinner or a spontaneous family conversation. It was a perfectly orchestrated ambush. "Mom," Regina said in a falsely sweet voice, "we've been doing a little research. It turns out Dad had some outstanding debts when he died. Debts that technically transferred to the property." My world swayed. My husband had died 5 years ago after a long illness. He had been an honest, hard-working man his entire life. The idea that he had left hidden debts was absurd. "That's a lie," I said, my voice breaking. "Your father would never have hidden something like that. I went through all his papers when he died." Philip opened his briefcase and took out several documents. "Unfortunately, Mrs. Marlene, I have evidence here of loans your late husband applied for during his last months of life, loans that were secured with the property." I approached to look at the papers with trembling hands. The numbers danced before my eyes, but something didn't add up. The dates, the signatures, none of it looked like my husband's handwriting. "These documents are fake," I whispered, feeling the room start to spin around me. "Mom, don't be ridiculous." Regina approached me with a smile that tried to be understanding but only managed to frighten me more. "Philip is a highly respected lawyer. He wouldn't work with forged documents." "Of course not," Philip added with an oily smile. "All these documents have been duly verified. The debts amount to a considerable sum, Mrs. Marlene. If it's not resolved soon, the creditors could foreclose on the property." "But there's a solution," Edward interjected, coming up on my other side. "If you transfer the house to my name, I'll take care of all the debts. You can continue to live there without any worries, and we'll handle the legal and financial aspects." It was perfect. Too perfect. A solution that magically solved all the problems and, coincidentally, ended with them owning my house. "I need time to think," I said, heading for the door again. But Edward didn't move. "I'm afraid we don't have time, Marlene. The creditors want an answer by Friday." "Today is Wednesday," I exclaimed. "You're telling me I have 2 days to decide on something so important?" "Mom, don't make it more complicated." Regina stood in front of me, blocking my view of the door. "It's a simple decision. Either you sign and stay peacefully in your home, or you risk losing everything by being stubborn." I felt as though the walls of the apartment were closing in on me. 3 people were surrounding me, pressuring me, manipulating me, lying directly to my face, and one of those people was my own daughter. "I'm not signing anything today," I said, managing to keep my voice steady despite the terror I felt. "If there really are debts, I need to verify them with my own lawyer." That's when Regina completely exploded. "That's enough," she screamed, grabbing my arm with a strength that surprised me. "I'm sick of your antics. I'm sick of you acting like we're your enemies." She dragged me towards the balcony before I could react. The glass door slid open, and the cold afternoon wind hit my face like a slap. "Regina, let go of me," I yelled, but her hands gripped my arms tighter. "No," she screamed directly in my face, her eyes shining in a way that terrified me. "Either you sign the house over to my husband's name, or you're going to fall from this balcony." The 12th floor wind roared in my ears as Regina pushed me closer and closer to the balcony railing. Her fingers dug into my arms like claws, and for the first time in my life, I felt true terror towards my own daughter. The void stretched out below us, and the city lights were beginning to flicker on in the distance like tiny, menacing stars. "Regina, please," I begged, trying to keep my balance as she pressed me against the metal railing. "I'm your mother. You can't be serious." "I am completely serious," she screamed back, her voice seeming to come from the depths of hell. Her eyes were bloodshot, and there was spittle at the corners of her mouth. "I'm sick of you treating us like we're strangers. That house should be ours by right." The cold metal of the railing dug into my back, and I could feel my feet slipping slightly on the damp balcony floor. Regina's apartment was in one of the tallest buildings downtown, and from that height, the people on the street looked like tiny ants moving aimlessly. The thought of falling from that height filled me with a panic I had never experienced in my 63 years. "Regina, look at me." I tried to make eye contact with her, searching for any trace of the sweet girl I had raised. "I'm the same woman who took care of you when you had pneumonia at 8 years old. The one who stayed up all night when you had a high fever. The one who worked double shifts to pay for your college." For a moment, I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. Her grip loosened slightly, and I thought I had reached her. But then Edward approached the balcony and whispered something in her ear that I couldn't hear over the wind. "No," Regina shouted with renewed fury. "I'm not falling for your emotional manipulation anymore. For years, you've used those same stories to make us feel guilty." From inside the apartment, I could hear Philip shuffling papers and muttering instructions into his phone, as if he were handling a routine business transaction, as if a daughter threatening to throw her mother from a balcony was completely normal in his line of work. "Regina, listen to me," I tried, using the calm tone I used when she was little and had nightmares. "We can solve this another way. We can talk. We can find solutions that work for all of us. It doesn't have to end like this." "Yes, it does have to end like this." She shook me so hard my head hit the metal railing. The pain was immediate and sharp, and I felt a trickle of blood start to run down my forehead. "Because you're too stubborn to listen to reason. Because you'd rather be selfish than think about your own daughter's future." Tears started rolling down my cheeks, mixing with the blood from my forehead. Not just from the physical pain, but from the emotional devastation of seeing my child turned into a creature I didn't recognize. When had I lost my Regina? When had the love she felt for me transformed into this visceral hatred? "Do you know how much money we owe because of you?" she screamed, bringing her face so close to mine I could feel her hot breath on my skin. "Do you have any idea the sacrifices we've had to make because you refused to help us?" "What sacrifices?" I managed to ask through my sobs. "What are you talking about?" "Edward lost his job 6 months ago," she yelled. "6 months, Mom? And you're just sitting pretty in your big house, not a care in the world for us." It was the first I had heard of Edward's unemployment. During all these months, whenever they came to visit, he always talked about his job as if everything was perfect. He had even mentioned possible promotions and bonuses. "Regina, why didn't you tell me?" I asked, genuinely confused. "If I had known you were in trouble, we would have found a solution together." "Because we knew you'd just give us one of your lectures on financial responsibility," she answered sarcastically. "Because we knew you'd make us feel like failures." Edward moved closer to the balcony, with a smile that tried to be reassuring but only unsettled me more. "Marlene, do you understand now why we need the house? It's not a whim, it's survival. We've exhausted all other options. But why does my house have to be the solution?" I asked them, clinging tighter to the railing. "You can sell the apartment. You can move somewhere cheaper. You can look for other jobs." "This apartment is mortgaged to the hilt," Regina interrupted. "We can't sell it because we owe more than it's worth. And Edward has been looking for work for months without any luck." Slowly, the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together in my mind. It wasn't just greed that motivated them. It was financial desperation. They had built a lifestyle they couldn't afford, and now they were looking for an easy way out at the expense of my stability. "Mom," Regina's voice suddenly changed, becoming sweet and manipulative. "I don't want to hurt you. I really don't. But you have no idea how desperate we are. If you really love me, if you really care about me, you'll do this for me." Emotional blackmail, the favorite weapon of manipulators. But I had lived long enough to recognize it, especially after years of marriage to Frank, who had also been an expert in that kind of manipulation. "Regina, if you're really in financial trouble, we can find other solutions," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, despite the wind making it harder to speak. "I can lend you money. I can help you in other ways. But I'm not giving away my house." "We don't want your money," she screamed, pushing me harder against the railing. "Your savings aren't enough to cover our debts. We need the full value of the house." There was the truth. They didn't want my help. They wanted my entire net worth. They wanted me to be left with nothing so they could save themselves from the consequences of their bad financial decisions. "And what happens to me?" I asked them. "Where am I going to live when I no longer have a house?" "We already told you. You can keep living there," Edward answered from behind. "We just need the property in our name so we can use it as collateral for new loans." "New loans?" I repeated in disbelief. "You're going to mortgage my house to borrow more money?" The silence that followed was more telling than any answer they could have given me. That was exactly what they planned to do. "We don't want to discuss the details," Regina shook me again. "We just need you to trust us." "I am not selfish," I told her with a firmness that surprised even myself. "I am a woman who has worked her entire life to have a home of her own. I am a mother who raised her daughter with love and dedication. And I am a widow who deserves respect, not death threats." Regina was silent for a moment, as if my words had pierced the barrier of anger she had built around herself. For an instant, I saw a flash of the girl she used to be, vulnerable and scared. But that flash disappeared as quickly as it had come. "Respect is earned," she told me, in a chilling voice that cut through me like a knife, "and you haven't earned mine." Those words hurt me more than any physical blow I had ever received. My own daughter, my only family, was telling me that I hadn't earned her respect. After all the years of sacrifice, after all the sleepless nights when she was sick, after all the dreams I had put on hold to make sure she had the best opportunities in life. "You know what?" I told her, finding an inner strength I didn't know I possessed. "You're right. Respect is earned. And you've just lost all of mine." Her face contorted with rage, and for a moment I thought she was really going to follow through on her threat. Her hands pushed me with more force against the railing, and I felt my body lean dangerously towards the void. Vertigo completely took over, and for the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to feel that death was just inches away. It was at that exact moment that we heard the unmistakable sound of a key turning in the lock of the front door. Regina froze, and I took advantage of that moment of distraction to pull myself a little away from the railing. We both looked towards the interior of the apartment, where Edward and Philip had also frozen, like statues. The sound of footsteps was clearly audible from the entryway, and I saw panic begin to register on the faces of my captors. "Regina," a familiar male voice called from the entrance. "Are you home?" I saw a light on, and the door was ajar. My heart stopped completely. I would have recognized that voice anywhere in the world, after 20 years of marriage and 5 years of divorce. It was a voice I had heard in the happiest and most painful moments of my life, a voice that had spoken words of love and also of farewell. It was Frank, my ex-husband, Regina's father. "Dad?" Regina whispered, letting go of me completely and taking several steps back. All the color had drained from her face, as if she had seen a ghost walking through the halls of her apartment. Her hands were shaking visibly, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. Edward moved quickly into the apartment, clearly trying to intercept Frank before he could see the full scene. Philip, for his part, began frantically stuffing documents into his briefcase, as if he could make all the evidence of what had been happening disappear. "Frank, what a surprise to see you here," I heard Edward say, with an artificially casual voice from the living room. "Regina and I were just having a little family meeting with Marlene." But Frank was no fool. During all the years we were married, he had developed an almost supernatural instinct for sensing when something wasn't right. And at that moment, everything in the apartment screamed that something was terribly wrong. "A family meeting?" Frank's voice was getting closer to the balcony. "And why hasn't Marlene answered when I greeted her?" My ex-husband appeared in the doorway of the balcony, and his expression changed radically when he saw the whole scene. His eyes moved quickly from my face, stained with tears and blood, to Regina with her hands still outstretched as if she had been pushing something, to the unknown lawyer trying to hide documents, and finally to Edward, with that fake smile plastered on his face. Frank had aged in the 5 years since our divorce. His hair was completely gray now, and he had new wrinkles around his eyes. But his bearing was still the same, tall, imposing, with a presence that had always been able to fill any room he entered. "What the hell is going on here?" he asked in that authoritative voice I remembered from our marriage. It was the same tone he used when he had to deal with serious problems at his job, when he needed people to know he wasn't joking. Edward hurried over, trying to control the situation with that oily smile I had already learned to detest. "Frank, it's really a surprise to see you. We were just having a conversation about some family matters. Nothing important." "Nothing important?" Frank looked me straight in the eye, and I saw in them the same sharp intelligence that had made me fall in love with him decades ago. Despite our divorce, despite all the problems we had, Frank had always been a man capable of reading situations with pinpoint accuracy. "Marlene, are you okay?" I couldn't answer immediately. The words were stuck in my throat, and all I could do was shake my head as tears continued to stream down my cheeks. My whole body was trembling, both from the cold wind and the adrenaline still coursing through my veins after being so close to the edge of the balcony. Frank entered the balcony with decisive movements and placed himself between Regina and me. His presence completely changed the dynamic of the situation, as if he had brought a protective energy with him that I hadn't felt in years. Despite all our marital problems, Frank had never allowed anyone to hurt me in his presence. "Regina," he said to our daughter in a voice that allowed no argument, "I want you to explain to me exactly what is happening here, and I want the truth, the whole truth." Regina looked towards Edward, as if seeking instructions on what to say. But Edward was too busy trying to maintain his facade of normalcy to give her any useful signal. "Dad, it's not what it looks like," Regina began in that childish voice she used to use when she was little and had done something wrong. "We were just trying to help Mom with some legal problems." "Legal problems?" Frank turned to Philip, who was still trying to discreetly make the documents disappear. "And who are you?" Philip cleared his throat nervously. "I'm Philip Mendoza, an attorney. I was assisting the family with some property-related matters." "Property-related matters?" Frank repeated slowly, as if savoring each word. "And those matters required my ex-wife to end up bleeding on a balcony?" It was then I realized that Frank had noticed the blood still trickling from my forehead. His expression hardened even more, and I saw his hands clench into fists at his sides. "That was an accident," Edward intervened quickly. "Marlene tripped and hit herself against the railing. We were about to clean her wound when you arrived." Frank looked me straight in the eye. "Marlene, is that true?" During all the years of our marriage, Frank had been many things. A workaholic, stubborn, sometimes insensitive, but he had never been stupid. And at that moment, I could see in his eyes that he knew perfectly well that something much more serious had been happening. "No," I managed to whisper finally. "It wasn't an accident." The silence that followed was deafening. Frank looked back and forth between Regina and Edward, and I could see the pieces of the puzzle starting to form in his mind. "Regina," he said in a dangerously calm voice, "you hurt your mother." "Dad, she's being dramatic." Regina tried to defend herself, but her voice sounded desperate. "We were just trying to make her see reason." "Make her see reason about what?" Edward decided to take control of the conversation. "Frank, the situation is complicated. Marlene has some financial problems related to debts that her late second husband apparently left behind." Frank stood still for a moment, processing what he had just heard. "Debts? What debts?" Philip cleared his throat again. "Mr. Frank, I have documentation here showing substantial loans that were secured with Mrs. Marlene's property." "Let me see those documents." Frank held out his hand to Philip. "I'm afraid that's not possible." Philip quickly put the papers back in his briefcase. "They are confidential documents that only concern my client." "Your client?" Frank turned to Edward. "You hired this lawyer." Edward nodded. "Yes, we're trying to help Marlene resolve these issues before they become public." "How thoughtful," Frank said with a sarcasm that cut like a knife. He walked over to me and gently took my arm. "Marlene, do you want to sort this out here? Or would you rather we talk in private? For the first time in hours, I felt I had a real choice. Frank was offering me a way out, a chance to get away from this situation without having to face my aggressors alone. I want to leave, I said, my voice sounding stronger than I expected. I want to get out of here right now. Regina took a step forward. Mom, you can't leave. We haven't solved the problem with the house yet. Frank stepped between Regina and me. The only problem I see here is that my daughter seems to have completely lost all respect for her mother. Dad, you don't understand, Regina cried. We're in serious trouble. We need that house. And that justifies threatening your own mother? The silence that followed was telling. Regina didn't deny the accusation. She just stood there, her eyes filled with tears of frustration and rage. Frank gently guided me towards the interior of the apartment. Come on, Marlene. We're getting out of here. But Edward wasn't going to let us leave so easily. He positioned himself in front of the apartment's main door, completely blocking our exit with a smile that no longer pretended to be friendly. Frank, I don't think you understand the gravity of the situation, he said, his voice having lost all pretense of civility. Marlene has outstanding legal obligations. She can't just leave and pretend these problems don't exist. Frank stopped and turned slowly towards Edward. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Excuse me? Frank asked in a dangerously calm voice. You heard me perfectly. Edward crossed his arms. We've invested too much time and money in this. Marlene is going to sign those papers today. Or what? Frank took a step closer to Edward. Edward glanced towards Philip, as if looking for support, but the lawyer seemed to have decided it was safer to stay out of the unfolding confrontation. Or we'll have to take more drastic legal measures, Edward finally said. Frank laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh I had heard only a few times in our marriage, always before things got very serious. Legal measures? Frank repeated. Like forging debt documents? The color drained from Edward's face. What are you implying? I'm not implying anything. Frank took out his cell phone. I'm saying I'm going to call my own lawyer to review those documents your friend Philip has been waving around. Philip immediately became nervous. Mr. Frank, that won't be necessary. The documents have been duly verified by... By whom? Frank interrupted. By yourself? Regina approached her father, her eyes filled with panic. Dad, please, don't make this more complicated than it already is. Daughter, the only complicated thing here is that you've apparently lost your moral compass. Frank didn't take his eyes off Edward as he dialed a number on his phone. Edward lunged at Frank, trying to snatch the phone away. You're not calling anyone. But Frank had been a sturdy man his whole life, and despite being in his 60s, he was still stronger than Edward. With a quick movement, he pushed Edward aside and completed his call. Michael? It's Frank, he said into the phone. I need you to come to Regina's apartment immediately. Yes, it's an emergency. No, I can't explain over the phone. The address is... Hang up that phone, Regina screamed, also trying to grab her father's cell. But Frank had already ended the call. Michael will be here in 20 minutes, he announced. He's one of the best real estate fraud attorneys in the city. The word fraud echoed in the apartment like thunder. Philip began packing his documents even faster, clearly wanting to get out of there before another lawyer arrived. This is ridiculous, Edward said, but his voice had lost all its previous authority. There's no fraud here. Then you'll have no problem with Michael reviewing your documents, Frank replied calmly. Edward and Regina looked at each other, and I could see in their expressions that they were quickly weighing their options. For the first time since I had arrived at the apartment, they seemed to be losing control of the situation. Dad, Regina tried a different approach, coming to Frank with tears in her eyes. Why are you being so cruel to us? We're just trying to survive. Regina, there's a difference between surviving and swindling, Frank told her. And what I saw on that balcony was definitely not survival. Philip cleared his throat. Mr. Frank, I think there's a misunderstanding here. The documents I have are completely legitimate. Then you won't have a problem showing them to another lawyer, Frank interrupted. Philip looked at Edward, clearly waiting for instructions. Edward, for his part, seemed to be wrestling internally with some important decision. Fine, Edward said finally. Marlene can leave. But this isn't over. Is that a threat? Frank asked. It's a promise, Edward replied. Her late husband's debts are real, Frank, and eventually, Marlene will have to face them. Frank turned to me. Marlene, did your husband have debts when he died? I shook my head. I checked all his papers. There were no outstanding debts. Are you sure? Completely sure, I answered firmly. My husband was meticulous about finances. He had everything documented. Frank turned back to Philip. So where did these documents come from? Philip was becoming visibly more nervous. The debts were recently discovered. Sometimes, these documents take a while to process through the system. What system? Frank pressed. The banking system, Philip answered vaguely. Which bank specifically? Philip looked at Edward again, but Edward was now busy trying to calm Regina, who had started to hyperventilate. Listen, Frank said loudly, capturing everyone's attention. I'm going to tell you exactly what's going to happen. Marlene and I are leaving here right now. Michael is going to review any documents you claim to have. And if it turns out you've been trying to swindle a widow with fake documents, I will sue you until you have nothing left. They're not fake documents, Regina screamed desperately. Then you'll have no problem proving their authenticity, Frank replied. Edward approached me directly. Marlene, think carefully. Do you really want to risk losing your house completely, when you could keep the right to live in it? And do you really think that's my only option? I replied, finding a strength in my voice I hadn't felt in hours. It's the only sensible option, Edward insisted. No, I said firmly. The sensible option is for me to leave here, review any documentation with my own lawyer, and never again allow myself to be threatened by my own family. Regina came to me with tear-filled eyes. Mom, if you leave now, our relationship will never recover. Her words hurt me deeply, but they also gave me clarity. Regina, our relationship was damaged the moment you decided to push me against a balcony. It wasn't my decision to leave that ruined it. It was a moment of desperation, Regina cried. And this is my moment of self-preservation, I told her. Frank came to me and offered his arm. Ready? I nodded. But before heading to the door, I turned to Regina one last time. Regina, if you really need financial help, there are ways to ask for it that don't involve threats, lies, or suspicious documents, I told her. When you're ready to have that conversation honestly and respectfully, you know where to find me. Regina began to sob. Mom, please, don't abandon me. I'm not abandoning you, I replied. You already made that decision when you chose to hurt the person who loves you most in the world. Edward took a step forward. Marlene, this is a mistake. You're going to regret this decision. Frank stepped between Edward and me. The only person who is going to regret anything here is you, when my lawyer is done investigating your documents. With that, Frank and I headed for the door. This time, no one tried to stop us physically, though I could hear Regina crying hysterically behind us. When we reached the hallway of the building, I felt like I could breathe properly for the first time in hours. The air in the hallway felt fresh and clean, compared to the toxic atmosphere of Regina's apartment. Are you okay? Frank asked me gently as we waited for the elevator. No, I answered honestly. But I'm going to be. The elevator arrived and we got in silently. Frank pressed the button for the ground floor, and as we descended, I felt as if I were leaving behind not just Regina's apartment, but also a part of my life that I could never get back. The elevator mirror showed my reflection a 63-year-old woman with disheveled hair, dried blood on her forehead, and eyes swollen from crying. I looked like a stranger. Where do you want to go? Frank asked me, when we reached the building's lobby. The question took me by surprise. In all the commotion, I hadn't thought about what I would do after leaving the apartment. My house was a 40-minute bus ride away, but the idea of being alone right now terrified me. I don't know, I admitted. My house, I guess? Frank shook his head. I don't think it's a good idea for you to be alone tonight. Do you have anywhere you can stay? The reality hit me like a cold slap. Regina had been my only close family. I had no siblings, my parents had died years ago, and I had lost touch with most of my friends during the years I dedicated entirely to caring for my sick husband. Not really, I murmured, feeling a new wave of sadness wash over me. Frank looked at me with an expression that mixed concern and something I couldn't quite identify. You can stay at my apartment tonight. I have a guest room. The offer surprised me. Frank and I had maintained a cordial but distant relationship since our divorce. We saw each other occasionally at family events related to Regina, but we had never spent time alone together. "I don't want to be a bother," I said automatically. "Marlene?" Frank put a hand gently on my shoulder. "After what you've just been through, being alone is not an option." I nodded, feeling immense gratitude towards this man who, despite our past problems, had shown up at the exact moment I needed him most. We walked to the building's parking garage, where Frank had his car. During the drive to his apartment, neither of us said much. I was lost in my thoughts, trying to process everything that had happened, while Frank drove with that intense focus I remembered from our marriage. Frank's apartment was exactly what I expected. Tidy, minimalist, with quality furniture, but no feminine touches. It was obvious he had been living alone for the 5 years since our divorce. "The guest room is this way." He showed me a small room with a single bed and a desk. "The bathroom is at the end of the hall. There are clean towels in the closet." "Thank you," I murmured, feeling the exhaustion of the whole day finally start to hit me. "Are you hungry?" Frank asked. "You haven't eaten anything since you got to Regina's apartment." He was right. The supposed family dinner had never happened, and my stomach was completely empty. But the thought of eating seemed impossible. "I don't think I can eat anything," I told him. "At least let me make you some tea," Frank insisted. "It will help you calm down." I nodded and followed him to the kitchen. While Frank made the tea, I sat in one of the dining room chairs and finally allowed all the tension of the day to be released. I started to cry, not the hysterical sobs I'd had at Regina's apartment, but silent tears of grief and loss. Frank placed a steaming cup of tea in front of me and sat in the chair next to me. He didn't say anything. He just sat with me while I cried. "How did we get to this point?" I finally asked through my tears. "How did our daughter become someone capable of threatening me like that?" Frank sighed deeply. "Honestly, Marlene, I don't know, but I think the problems started long before today." "What do you mean?" "Regina has always had manipulative tendencies," Frank said carefully. "Remember when she was 15 and made us believe she was failing math to get a new computer?" I did remember. Regina had forged a report card to make us think she needed a better computer to improve her grades. When we discovered the lie, she had cried and convinced us that she just wanted to make us proud of her. "I thought it was just a teenage prank," I murmured. "Me too," Frank agreed. "But now I wonder if they weren't signs of something deeper." I took a sip of tea, feeling the warm liquid comfort me from the inside. "Do you think Edward influenced her?" Frank considered the question carefully. "I think Edward found someone who already had a certain predisposition to manipulation and exploited it. The idea hurt, but it made sense. Edward had come into Regina's life at a time when she was vulnerable, after ending a long relationship and struggling with her career." "Do you really think Philip's documents are fake?" I asked. "I'm almost certain," Frank replied. "Your husband was too careful with money to have left hidden debts, and the way Philip avoided showing the documents was very suspicious." My cell phone started ringing. Regina's name appeared on the screen. "Are you going to answer?" Frank asked. I shook my head. "I'm not ready to talk to her." The phone stopped ringing, but immediately started ringing again, and again after that. "Maybe you should answer," Frank suggested, "just to tell her you're okay." With trembling hands, I answered the call. "Mom?" Regina's voice sounded desperate. "Where are you? Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I replied in a voice that sounded colder than I intended. "Mom, please, we need to talk. What happened today was terrible. I don't know what came over me." "Regina, I'm not ready to talk to you," I told her honestly. "But Mom..." Philip left. And his documents. Maybe Dad was right. Maybe they weren't real. I felt a mix of relief and sadness. Relief that my suspicions about the documents were correct, but sadness that Regina had been willing to threaten me based on lies. "Are you saying you knew the documents were fake?" I asked. There was a long silence on the line. "No, not exactly. Edward assured me they were real. I just wanted to save us. Regina, threatening me wasn't saving you. It was destroying our relationship." "I know." Regina started crying over the phone. "I know, and I'm so sorry. Can you forgive me?" The question took me by surprise. Part of me wanted to say yes immediately, that of course I forgave her, that she was my daughter, and I loved her unconditionally. But another part of me, a wiser part, knew that forgiveness couldn't come so easily after what had happened. "Regina," I said carefully, "forgiveness is something that's going to take time. A lot of time. But will you try?" she asked hopefully. "I will try," I promised her. "But things have to change. Completely." "What do you mean?" "I mean that if we're going to rebuild our relationship, it's going to be on my terms. Without Edward. Without lies. Without manipulation." Regina was silent for a moment. "Without Edward?" "Without Edward," I confirmed. "At least for now. Mom, he's my husband. And I'm your mother. And today, your husband helped you threaten my life." Another long silence. "I need time to think," Regina said finally. "Take all the time you need," I replied. "But, Regina, while you're thinking, remember this. I am not going to live the rest of my life in fear of my own daughter." I hung up the phone before she could respond. Frank looked at me with an expression of respect. "That was very brave." "I don't feel brave," I admitted. "I feel like I'm losing my daughter forever." "Maybe," Frank said softly. "Or maybe you're giving her the chance to find herself again." 3 weeks had passed since that terrible afternoon in Regina's apartment. 3 weeks during which my life had taken a completely unexpected turn. Michael, Frank's lawyer, had confirmed our suspicions. The documents Philip had presented were complete forgeries. My late husband's signatures had been faked, and the dates on the supposed loans didn't match any real bank records. I stayed at Frank's apartment for a week after the incident, mainly because I didn't feel safe being alone. Not because I feared Regina would show up at my house, but because I didn't trust my own emotional stability. The nights were the worst. I would wake up from nightmares, reliving the moment Regina pushed me against the balcony railing. Frank was surprisingly patient with me during those days. He cooked my meals, accompanied me to medical appointments to check the wound on my forehead, and even took me to see a psychologist who helped me process the trauma of what I had experienced. He never pushed to talk about our past marriage, nor did he suggest that what he was doing meant anything more than genuine concern for my well-being. When I finally returned to my house, I found that the place felt different. Nothing had physically changed. The same curtains hung in the windows. The same furniture occupied the same positions. The same garden bloomed in the backyard. But something fundamental had changed in how I perceived my home. It was no longer just the place where I lived. It was now the symbol of my independence, my right to make my own decisions, my value as a person beyond my role as a mother. Regina had tried to call me 6 times during those 3 weeks. Each time, she had left increasingly desperate messages on my answering machine. The first were apologies and pleas for forgiveness. The next contained explanations of how Edward had manipulated her and promises that she had ended things with him. The most recent were simply crying and confessions of how much she missed me. I hadn't returned any of those calls. Not because I didn't want to talk to her, but because I knew I needed to be completely clear about what I wanted to say before having that conversation. The psychologist had explained that victims of family abuse often feel pressured to forgive too quickly before they have fully processed the trauma and established healthy boundaries. One Friday afternoon, while I was watering the violets in my garden, I heard the doorbell ring. My heart immediately started racing, thinking it might be Regina. But when I looked through the window, I saw an older woman I didn't recognize standing on my porch. I opened the door carefully. "Can I help you?" "You're Marlene," the woman asked with a warm smile. "My name is Susan. I'm Edward's mother." My blood ran cold. The mother of the man who had helped my daughter threaten me was standing on my doorstep. "What do you want?" I asked, keeping the door ajar. "I need to talk to you," Susan said. "Please, it will only take a moment." Something in her tone made me hesitate. She didn't sound threatening or manipulative like her son. She sounded tired. "All right," I finally said, opening the door completely, "but I'd rather we talk out here, on the porch." Susan nodded and sat in one of the wicker chairs I had by the door. She was a woman of about my age, with perfectly styled gray hair and wrinkles that spoke of many years of worry. "Marlene," she began, "I came to apologize for my son's behavior." The statement took me completely by surprise. "Apologize?" "Edward told me what happened at Regina's apartment," Susan continued. He told me about the fake documents, about the threats, about everything. And why are you telling me this? I asked, still wary. Susan sighed deeply. Because this isn't the first time Edward has done something like this. I felt as if I had been punched in the stomach. What do you mean? My son has a pattern, Susan explained with obvious pain in her voice. He finds vulnerable women, makes them fall in love with him, and then manipulates them to get money or property. Are you saying Regina isn't the first? She's the third, Susan admitted. His first wife lost her house because of him. The second lost her life savings. I was speechless. Regina hadn't just been a victim of manipulation. She had been the victim of an experienced predator. Why didn't you report him? I asked. My own son? Susan looked at me with tear-filled eyes. I've lived with the guilt of not having done anything for 5 years. But when Edward told me what had happened with you, when he told me they had reached the point of physically threatening you, I knew I had to do something. What do you want me to do? Nothing, Susan replied. I just wanted you to know the truth, and I wanted you to know that your daughter isn't a bad person. She's the victim of someone who is very good at manipulating. Susan's words began to change my perspective on what had happened. For 3 weeks, I had been struggling with the question of how my daughter could have treated me that way. The answer that she had been manipulated by an expert didn't excuse her behavior, but it did explain it. Do you know if Regina is okay? I asked, surprising myself. She's living alone, Susan replied. Edward left the apartment 2 weeks ago. I think she finally realized who he really was. I felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief that Regina had broken up with Edward, but also concern for how she was handling everything on her own. Why are you telling me this? I asked again. Because I'm a mother, Susan replied simply. And because if my son stole time with your daughter from you, I want to do what I can to help you get it back. After Susan left, I sat on the porch for hours, processing what I had learned. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the lights of the neighboring houses were beginning to turn on one by one. For the first time in 3 weeks, I felt I had enough information to make an informed decision about Regina. Not a decision based on pain, anger, or fear, but on understanding. That night, for the first time since the incident, I dialed Regina's number. Mom, she answered on the first ring, her voice sounding as if she had been crying. Hello, Regina, I said simply. Mom, I can't believe you called. I've been waiting. I know, I interrupted gently. I've heard your messages. All of them? All of them. There was an awkward silence on the line. Finally, Regina spoke. Can you ever forgive me? The question I had been avoiding for 3 weeks was finally on the table. And for the first time, I felt I had a real answer. Regina, I said carefully. Forgiveness isn't something that happens overnight, but I do think we can work towards it. Really? Really. But it's going to require a lot of work from both of us. I'm willing to do whatever it takes, Regina said quickly. Starting with therapy, I said firmly. Both individual and family. Yes, Regina agreed immediately. Whatever you say, and complete honesty about everything that happened with Edward. Yes, and absolute respect for my boundaries and decisions. Yes, Mom, anything you want. I took a deep breath. All right, then I think we can try. The sound of Regina's relieved sobs through the phone both broke my heart and healed it at the same time. Can we see each other? She asked through her sobs. Soon, I promised. But first, I need you to find a therapist. I already did, Regina said quickly. I have my first appointment on Monday. I was pleasantly surprised that she had taken that initiative on her own. Very well, I said. Then let's talk after your first session. After hanging up, I sat in my living room and looked at the family photos hanging on the walls. Photos of Regina as a baby, of her graduation, of her wedding to Edward. I realized I was going to have to decide what to do with that last photo. But for the first time in 3 weeks, I felt hope that maybe, eventually, there would be new photos to take. 6 months had passed since that phone call, marking the beginning of the reconstruction of my relationship with Regina. 6 months of therapy, difficult conversations, tears, gradual forgiveness, and the slow process of learning to trust my daughter again. It hadn't been easy, but we had made more progress than I ever thought possible. Regina had kept her word. She religiously attended individual therapy twice a week, and we had started family sessions once a month. During those sessions, we had explored not only the events of that terrible afternoon, but also patterns of behavior that had developed over years. The therapist had helped us understand how Edward's manipulation had exploited insecurities Regina had had since she was a teenager, especially related to money and stability. The full truth about Edward had gradually come out during those sessions. Regina told me how he had started by controlling small decisions, what clothes to wear, who to spend time with, how to handle money. Slowly, he had isolated her from her friends and had sown doubts about her relationship with me. He had made her believe that I was being selfish by not helping with their financial problems, and had fed her fears about the future until she had come to believe that threatening me was the only solution. Edward had completely disappeared from our lives after Frank had threatened to sue him. Michael, the lawyer, had discovered that he indeed had a history of similar scams in other cities. Apparently, he moved every few years to avoid the consequences of his actions. Philip, the supposed lawyer, turned out to be an actor Edward had hired to make his lie about the fake debts more convincing. Regina had had to declare bankruptcy, just as Frank had suggested months before. She had lost the apartment, the car, and almost all her belongings. But she had also lost the debts that Edward had accumulated in her name without her knowledge. Now she was living in a small one-bedroom apartment, working 2 part-time jobs, and slowly rebuilding her life from scratch. And I was proud of her. It was a Sunday afternoon, and Regina had come for lunch at my house, as she had been doing every 2 weeks for the last 3 months. These meals had become a precious tradition for both of us, a chance to connect without the intensity of therapy sessions. "Mom, can I tell you something?" Regina said as we washed dishes together after lunch. "Of course," I replied, though I still felt a small pang of anxiety whenever Regina wanted to talk about something serious. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened," she began, carefully drying a plate before putting it away, "and I've realized that I've never thanked you for not calling the police that night." The statement took me by surprise. "Regina." "No, let me finish," she interrupted gently. "You had every right to report me. What I did was assault. I could have gone to jail. It was true." Frank and Michael had discussed that possibility with me in the weeks following the incident. Legally, I had a solid case to press charges against both Regina and Edward, but I had never seriously considered that option. "You're my daughter," I said simply. "Yes, but that doesn't excuse what I did," Regina replied. "And the fact that you gave me the chance to fix things, to get help, to become a better person, that means everything to me." I felt tears forming in my eyes. These moments of complete honesty and vulnerability from Regina were what reminded me why it had been worth fighting for our relationship. "You know what has helped me most in therapy?" Regina continued. "What?" "Realizing that you never stopped loving me. Even when I was being horrible to you, even when I physically hurt you, you never stopped being my mother." Those words completely broke me. I put down the plate I was washing and hugged Regina, feeling years of pain and loss finally begin to truly heal. "I could never stop loving you," I whispered to her. "That doesn't mean I will always tolerate harmful behavior, but the love that's permanent." We stood there hugging for several minutes, crying together for all we had lost and celebrating what we had managed to regain. When we separated, Regina looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen in years. Genuine peace. "Mom, there's something else I want to tell you," she said. "What is it?" "I want you to know that I completely understand if you never manage to trust me completely again. I understand if there's always a part of you that wonders if I could hurt you again." The brutal honesty of her statement struck me. "Regina." "No, it's okay," she interrupted, "because I have that same question too. But what I do know is that I now have tools to recognize when I'm being manipulated. I have a therapist who helps me process my emotions in a healthy way, and I have clear boundaries about what kind of behavior I will tolerate from other people." This was exactly what I had been waiting to hear for months. Not empty promises that it would never happen again, but real evidence that Regina understood what had gone wrong and had taken concrete steps to prevent it from happening again. "And there's something else," Regina continued. "What?" "I've started attending a support group for victims of domestic abuse." This was the first time Regina had used that word to describe her relationship with Edward. For months, She had struggled to accept that what she had experienced qualified as abuse. "How do you feel about it?" I asked. "Scared," she admitted, "but also empowered. There are other women there who have been through similar things, and some of them have managed to rebuild their lives completely." "It's helping you?" "A lot," Regina smiled for the first time in the conversation. "In fact, I've been thinking about becoming a group facilitator eventually, after I finish my own recovery." The idea that Regina could turn her painful experience into a way to help other people filled me with a pride I hadn't felt in years. "I think you'd be excellent at that," I told her honestly. "Really?" "Really. You have empathy, you've lived the experience, and you've done the hard work of recovery. Those are exactly the qualities other victims would need to see." Regina smiled more broadly. "Thanks, Mom. Your support means everything to me." We finished washing the dishes in a comfortable silence, each lost in our own thoughts. When we were done, we sat in the living room with cups of tea, as we had done so many times during her childhood. "Mom, can I ask you something personal?" Regina said after a while. "Of course. You and Dad have been talking more since all of this." It was a question I had been expecting. Frank and I had indeed been in more frequent contact since the incident. He had been the one who helped me find the therapist, who had accompanied me to the first few sessions because I was too nervous to go alone, and who had been available to talk during the most difficult moments of the recovery. "Yes," I admitted. "We've been talking, and it's complicated," I said honestly. "We've both changed a lot since our divorce. We've both grown up." Regina nodded thoughtfully. "Do you think you might try again?" The question surprised me. For 5 years, the idea of reconciling with Frank had been unthinkable. Our divorce had been bitter, full of resentment and hurtful words. But the last few months had shown that we had both matured considerably. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "But I do know that we've managed to build a real friendship for the first time in years." "I'm glad to hear that," Regina said. "You were always better as a team." She was right. Frank and I had been excellent parents together, even when our marriage was failing. Maybe there was hope for some kind of future together, even if it was different from what we had before. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Frank. "Marlene, I hope I'm not interrupting your lunch with Regina." "Not at all," I replied. "In fact, we just finished." "Perfect. Can I speak with both of you?" "I have some news about Edward." My heart sped up. "What kind of news?" "He was arrested in another city for attempted fraud. Apparently, he tried the same scheme with another family." I felt a mix of relief and sadness. Relief because Edward couldn't hurt anyone else, at least for a while. But sadness that another family had had to suffer for justice to finally catch up with him. "Is it okay if I come over to tell you the details in person?" Frank asked. I looked at Regina, who nodded vigorously. "Yes," I replied. "Come over." After hanging up, Regina looked at me with a thoughtful expression. "Mom, no matter what happens with Dad, no matter what happens with Edward, no matter anything else, I want you to know that these last few months have been the most important of my life." "Why?" "Because for the first time in years, I feel like myself again. The person I was before Edward came into my life, and that was only possible because you were willing to fight for me." I hugged her again, knowing that no matter what challenges came in the future, we had achieved something beautiful. We had found our way back to each other.